This video was brought to you by Belroy. As the Gaza war continues and Israel's response to the October 7th attack escalate, divisions within the EU have become increasingly apparent, with some states stressing Israel's right to self-defense and others accusing Israel of outright genocide. So in this video, we're going to take a look at those divisions and see who are the most pro-Israel and pro-Palestine countries within the EU. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Before we start, a quick disclaimer. Firstly, we don't have time to talk about every European country's position on this issue. So instead, we're going to focus on those countries that are conspicuously pro-Israel or conspicuously pro-Palestine. Secondly, labeling countries as pro or anti-Israel is obviously a simplification that ignores both intranational differences and historical context. For many European countries, whether they're pro-Palestine or pro-Israel sort of depends on who's in power at the moment, with right-wing parties usually being more pro-Israel and left-wing parties usually being more pro-Palestine. Spain, for example, has been one of Palestine's staunchest supporters in Europe, and just last week, Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez declared that his new government would, quote, work to recognize the state of Palestine. However, if this year's election had gone slightly differently and the right-wing People's Party had won enough seats to lead the government as the polls originally predicted, then Spain's Israel policy would have been very different, with the leader of the People's Party accusing the government of making a fool of itself with its position on Israel, and their prospective coalition partner, Vox, being the most pro-Israel party in Spain by some distance. Now, that the European right is more pro-Israel and the European left is pro-Palestine has something to do with the fact that, at least since the 70s, and especially since Netanyahu's return to power in 2009, Israel has become an explicitly right-wing political project. Now, this wasn't always the case. Back in the 50s and 60s, Israeli politics was actually dominated by the left, but drifted right after the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Anyway, let's start by taking a look at the most pro-Israel countries in Europe, beginning with Germany. Now, Germany has been one of Israel's staunchest and most consistent supporters. As recently as Tuesday, Chancellor Olaf Scholz insisted that Israel was acting within international law in its response to Gaza, describing the accusations made against Israel as absurd. And German authorities have actually banned the vast majority of pro-Palestinian protests. In November, the German government approved the export of over 303 million euros worth of defense equipment to Israel. And Germany's new rearmament doctrine, published a few days ago, even makes explicit reference to Israel, stating that Israel's right to exist is of particular importance, and that Israel's security is in the German national interest. What's particularly notable about the German case is that pro-Israel sentiment actually cuts across the political divide. Unlike in other countries where left-wingers are generally more pro-Palestine, the left in Germany are probably as pro-Israel as the right are. This seems at least partly related to Germany's collective memory of the Holocaust, which the German political class believes gives Germany a historic obligation to Israel's statehood. Something similar is also true in Austria, which also has a complicated history of the Holocaust, and voted with Israel against a humanitarian truce at the General Assembly last month. Actually, the Israel-Austria relationship really started blossoming in the late 2010s, after People's Party leader Sebastian Kurz decided to form a coalition with the right-wing Freedom Party. Now, the Freedom Party does have neo-Nazi roots and a long history of anti-Semitism, so Kurz realized that buddying up with Israel was a good way to deflect accusations of anti-Semitism and avoid the same diplomatic isolation Austria suffered last time the Freedom Party were in government during the 2000s. While Israeli officials still don't meet with Freedom Party ministers, Austria and Israel are close allies, and Netanyahu described Kurz as a true friend of Israel's and the Jewish people's. Austria's neighbour, Hungary, is also remarkably pro-Israel, and was one of the first countries to ban pro-Palestine rallies. At the UN General Assembly, Hungary voted with Israel against a humanitarian truce, and more recently against a resolution condemning illegal Israeli settlements in Palestine, where Hungary was one of just 7 countries to vote with Israel. At first glance, this might look a bit confusing, given Orban's government is often accused, at least by Western media, of trading on anti-Semitic tropes in his attacks on Hungarian philanthropist George Soros. Nevertheless, Hungarian-Israeli relations have been on the up for the past few years now, in part because Israel's right also sees left-leaning Soros as a political enemy. In fact, in 2019, Hungary opened a trade office in Jerusalem, implicitly recognizing it as part of Israel. And in 2021, Hungary blocked the EU from taking a formal position on the 2021 Israel-Palestine crisis, with Hungary's foreign minister accusing the rest of the EU of being unfairly anti-Israel. Now, judging by official statements, this seems to be because both countries see themselves as nationalist bulwarks against liberal imperialism. In 2020, for example, they put out a joint statement emphasizing the commonalities between Orban and Netanyahu's governments, which included the promotion of patriotic national values, a common position regarding the issue of preserving national identity and the importance of sovereignty, and the need to take action against illegal immigration. The final pro-Israel country we're going to mention is Czechia, which voted with Israel against the humanitarian truce at the UN General Assembly and called for the EU to cut funding to Palestinian groups. Like Hungary, most Czechs feel an ideological affinity with Israel, not just as a nationalist democracy, but also as a small country that has had to fight against its larger neighbours for independence. But let's move on to the second part of this video, the most pro-Palestinian countries in Europe, starting with Ireland. Now, we've already done a full video about the Israel-Ireland relationship, but the TLDR is that many Irish identify with what they see as Palestine's anti-colonial struggles, and Israel-Ireland tensions have only been exacerbated by a series of incidents, including the killing of multiple Irish soldiers in the UN peacekeeping mission in southern Lebanon, as well as the use of forged Irish passports by Israeli assassins in the killing of a Hamas official. Another country that's conspicuously pro-Palestine is Spain. Spain was one of the first countries to oppose the EU's suspension of aid to Palestine, and a Spanish minister has accused Israel of a planned genocide in Gaza, prompting Israel to accuse Spain of siding with Hamas. As we mentioned earlier, this is largely because the Spanish left are currently in power, and they're more pro-Palestine than the Spanish right are. Another member state to resist the suspension of Palestinian aid was Luxembourg, which has also called for a ceasefire and been one of the most pro-Palestine member states for a while now. Luxembourg was one of the only countries to resist the Abraham Accords, and Luxembourg hasn't voted with Israel on any of the 138 Israel-related General Assembly resolutions since 2015. Luxembourg's foreign minister, who's been in post since 2004, has long argued that European politicians have paid insufficient attention to the Middle East peace process, and criticised Netanyahu's settler program for undermining the two-state solution. Now, when it comes to our journalism, you clearly expect us to provide high quality and responsible reporting. But shouldn't you also expect the same from the products you buy? I certainly do, and that's why for the last few years I've been exclusively using wallets, phone cases, and passport cases from Bellroy, which is why I was super excited to hear that they wanted to sponsor some of our videos. As a loyal Bellroy user for the past few years now, I know quite how reliable and high quality their products are. My current phone case, for instance, is beautifully minimal in this stunning terracotta leather. That leather, by the way, is eco-tanned and achieved a gold rating from the Leather Working Group, recognizing excellence in environmental and labor practices. It's also just a beautiful, high-quality material that, in my experience, only gets better with age. Bellroy don't just talk about their environmental credentials either. They're also an officially certified B Corp company and have upcycled 10.5 million plastic water bottles, used 60,000 kilograms of industrial nylon cutoffs, and saved 15 million liters of water by using dry tan leathers. Their products are also just great to use. Designed around principles of minimalism, all of the Bellroy products that I've bought have been beautifully designed and easy to use, with their bags optimizing for functionality and efficiency, and their wallets are slimline enough to fit into any pocket. So find out why I've been using Bellroy for years now, and check out their huge array of products by clicking the link in the description. Plus, when you do, you'll get 10% off anything you order. Thanks to Bellroy for supporting the channel, and thanks to you for using our link.